the National Mall. You can probably picture this, the long, thin lawn that stretches from the Capitol to the Washington Monument in its middle. 1,800 tractors parked on the lawn and staged what amounted to a four-wheeled sit-in that lasted for more than a week. During that time, representatives of the American agriculture movement were meeting with people in the government and explaining their need for parity, again, for better prices, fairer prices. Outside, the rest of the several thousand farmers who had come there were trying to get the public's attention any way they could. In this photograph, you can see the farmer on the right is burning a bale of cotton, and you can see the Capitol in the back. Not far from here, another farmer burned a tractor on Independence Avenue. On another day, a group of farmers drove their tractors over to the offices of the USDA and chained up the tractors in front of the entrance so that no one could come or go. At one point, they even took a goat and heaved it over the fence at the White House. So for a very brief moment, there was a goat in residence on the White House lawn. So as you can imagine, over the course of these events, a number of farmers got arrested. I think it was somewhere close to 20 farmers got arrested. And as in response to this, the Washington Post wrote an editorial. And what they said was that these farmers were holding, quote, the wrong kind of protest. Well, the farmers responded to this by driving 100 of their tractors over to the Washington Post offices, taking a huge stack of newspapers from the day before, the one that had the editorial in it, and burning it, and demanding to see the editors. And they did. They got a meeting. And the New York Times the next day ran an article. The Washington Post, I believe, did not. The New York Times wrote this. This is part of the article. After the farmer editors meeting, Tommy Fulford, a farmer from Georgia, told reporters, they agreed they don't know a hell of a lot about agriculture. They know a lot more now. Well, now the sad end to this story and to every other story about a farmer's protest or farmer's strike in this country is that they failed. They didn't get what they wanted. And the primary reason, in my opinion, is they weren't actually asking to change the system, nor were they asking to change their role within the system. They were simply asking to be paid more, to be paid fairly. And while that's certainly a just cause, it's just not realistic, because the nature of the industrial system is to treat farmers and to pay them as industrial producers. And as long as you stick with that mindset, the system doesn't change, nor does the role that farmers have in it. What I think is necessary is to change, and I believe a lot of you do too, is to change the system itself, and as a result, to change the role that farmers play in it. And, you know, when these guys were on the National Mall, that really wasn't yet possible. But I would make the case that now it is. I would make the case that we're right at the beginning of a third stage in the evolution of the role that farmers play in American society. And I believe that the reason why we're right at the beginning of this new stage is that agriculture itself is entering a new stage, a whole new set of circumstances. I call this new set of circumstances the uncertain future. And it's characterized, I think, by three main pieces: climate change, depleted water resources, and the end of cheap energy. Now you combine these three things, and the whole game changes. All the old rules and patterns and assumptions about the way that agriculture works go out the window. If you take, for instance, water, two statistics from the Economic Research Service of the USDA. One is that 80% of all fresh water used in the United States goes to agriculture. In the West, in some regions, that's 90%. So every drop of fresh water that goes through the pipes, 80% goes to agriculture. Second statistic, only 16% of the farmland in the United States is irrigated. But that little portion, 16%, accounts for nearly half of the value of all the agricultural products that are made and sold in the United States. This is to say that water, fresh water, is a major driver for the agricultural economy. It's a major piece of what keeps the whole thing spinning. And that's one thing when the resource is abundant, when it's something that you hardly even think about. But what happens when those resources start to become scarce? The whole game changes. And in this new scenario, we can't afford to have farmers be just industrial producers. It'd be like asking our doctors to focus strictly on the manufacture of Band-Aids rather than diagnosing and treating our illnesses. Farmers and ranchers have the greatest knowledge of how food production actually happens on the ground, and that makes them essential in figuring out how to adapt it to this new future, how to make food production work with less water, with expensive energy, and with this whole new set of unpredictable climatic conditions. For the coming years, age, era, century, what we need is for farmers to be much more than just producers. We need them to be stewards. We need them to be innovators. And we need them to be leaders. Now, agriculture as a whole, as we have all seen, has been very slow to adapt to this new set of circumstances, this uncertain future. And as a result, the role that farmers play has been very slow to change, and honestly, hasn't changed significantly as far as we can see. But there is a growing number of farmers and ranchers around the country who are going ahead and doing this work themselves, who are changing the role that they play. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of our time here. I'm going to tell two stories of two farms that exemplify this. The first is a story about Tony Malmberg, who's a rancher in Wyoming. I figured he should go first. It's always farmers and ranchers, never ranchers and farmers. So for once, we'll put the rancher first. And I'm going to start off by just reading a bit about Tony. Tony Malmberg is a cowboy by blood. His grandfather ran away from home at age 12 to ride for the Matador Ranch in western South Dakota. And when he was a bit older, he supplemented his income by catching wild horses that he would then break and sell. Tony himself was raised in Nebraska's Sand Hills. By age 7, he was scatter raking with the hay crew on his family's ranch. And by 10, he was helping sort calves on horseback. As an adult, Tony has become what appears to be the quintessential cowboy. On his ranch in western Wyoming, he passes no morning without an eye on the weather rising over nearby Sheep Mountain. He goes nowhere without a hat, dusty straw for chores, black felt for dinner in town. And yet for every bit of Tony that is a classic cowboy, there's another part that shatters the stereotype. He has been a leader of the Farm Bureau and Wyoming Stock Growers Association, but he also rubs elbows with the local Nature Conservancy chapter and belongs to a book group at the library. His back still hurts from an incident with a bucking bronco. He treats it by doing yoga. He runs cattle as well as anybody, but he also keeps goats. He has even milked them. Tony will gladly tell you all of this, even illustrate it with a quote from Emerson or Khalil Gibran. Oddly enough, he credits it all to being tough, like a true cowboy, he says. He's quick to explain, saying, being tough doesn't mean bitching about the damn environmentalists. It means breaking your leg 5 miles from the ranch and being able to ride home because you have to. Being tough is about being able to survive. Tony found that as a player in the cutthroat beef industry, being tough meant changing who he was and how he saw the world. The transformation began one winter when the details of his life were so grim they sounded like a bad country song. He and his wife had divorced, his father had recently died, and the family ranch in Wyoming was barely staying out of bankruptcy. Tony was fine being short on money himself, but he was behind on child support, and he couldn't stomach that. He got a job working on an oil rig, but it didn't last long. The site dried up after a few months. Next, he found a job in a mine in Battle Mountain, Nevada. Now, this is a town that was voted the armpit of America by the Washington Post. It's primarily a mining town, but most of the workers there prove stereotypes true, blowing their earnings in casinos, bars, and brothels. During the months that Tony was there, he did allow himself to spend one night a week playing Texas Hold'em at the local casino. But the other 6 nights he lived a different life. He would return to his trailer on the edge of town and read. His material was books he had taken out of the library on 3 subjects he felt were missing from his education: economics, philosophy, and self-improvement. By the end of that winter, something had changed in him. He was perhaps the first person ever to be enlightened in the armpit of America. When talking about that time, he refers to a passage from Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. It goes, "There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till." Tony took that to heart, not just figuratively, but literally. He realized that in order to turn his life around, what he needed more than anything was to return to his family's ranch and figure out how to make it work. And not just get by, but to thrive. How he did that is perhaps best explained by another quote from the author Richard Manning in his book Grasslands. "The grassland is ruled by motion," Manning writes, "and all of its inhabitants learn to move or die." It goes back to what Tony says about being tough. After all these years of being told that survival is a matter of sticking to the rancher playbook and doing as everyone else does, it turns out that in reality, survival requires just the opposite. As Manning writes, it's the ability to move, the ability to question and to change, that is the difference between death and life. So Tony did it. He came back to the ranch and he made it work. He made it thrive. And more or less all of the changes he made came out of the fact that he began practicing something called holistic management. Now it sounds more new agey than it is. It's a concept, for those of you who don't know, it's a concept that was developed by a man named Alan Savory, who at the time was in Zimbabwe. And it's best known as a system for managing grazing in arid grasslands. Savory, thinking about the land around him in Zimbabwe, started thinking about how these grasslands had evolved in tandem with herds of large grazing herbivores, and that there had been this symbiotic relationship between those animals and the grasses and plants of these landscapes. in